Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Transportation Learning Network, welcome to today's presentation. This presentation is brought to you by the Transportation Learning Network and the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. Both programs are a program of the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University. TLN is a partnership with the 4 state DOTs of North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, and the Mountain Plains Consortium, which includes 8 universities in Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. Brenda will give more information on the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center, and we are grateful and proud of this partnership that we have created. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Brenda, so that you can introduce yourself and the program today.
Great, thank you, Chris, and greetings to everyone. It's great to see so many attendings here at our meeting today, and just thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thanks as well to our speaker for today, G. Marshall, and thanks also to Chris and all the other staff at the Transportation Learning Network for their help in coordinating this meeting. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for the grant funding that makes our work in these webinars possible. So for those who don't know me, my name is Brenda Lance. I'm the Associate Director of the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University, as well as the Program Director for our Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. So the webinar today is going to provide an update regarding the CDL Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, and tomorrow's webinar at the same time will provide an update on the entry-level driver training regulations and the training provider registry. So suggestions for topics for future webinars are always welcome. So if anything comes to mind during this webinar or at later times, feel free to contact me with that idea. So with that, at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. G. Marshall is a program manager with the Fmcsa Drug and Alcohol Division, and I'll turn it over to you to get us started, G.
Hi, thank you, Brenda. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to everybody today. The Clearinghouse is something near and dear to my heart. It's been very exciting to work on the development and the implementation of the Clearinghouse. So we're just going to go ahead and cover a few topics related to the Clearinghouse, provide a general overview, talk about registration, the queries and consent requests, as well as reporting violations. We do have several common issues and statistics that we would like to go ahead and share with you, and then round out the presentation with next steps and where to get additional information. So to start with the overview of the Clearinghouse, I'm sure that several of you have actually heard this presentation a little bit previously, but we just want to go ahead and remind people what the Clearinghouse is. It is a database, and it does include drug and alcohol violations for commercial driver's license and commercial learner's permit drivers. The violations are reported by both employers and medical review officers. They include positive tests, refusals, actual knowledge violations. The violations in the Clearinghouse, when they're reported to the Clearinghouse, the driver will be immediately prohibited from operating a CMV. And then also the information that will be shared in the Clearinghouse includes the return to duty process information that's related to the violations. Clearinghouse information is not available to the general public. Only authorized users will be able to use that to access the Clearinghouse for certain purposes. So if you don't have a specific reason to be in the Clearinghouse, then you would not be able to go ahead and log in and just view information. You do have to have a registration and specific user ID and password. For state driver's license agencies and state law enforcement agencies, they will receive the driver eligibility status only, and that is whether their driver is prohibited or not prohibited. And then just to be clear, drivers can only access their own information, but they cannot actually access information of any other drivers. We just want to go ahead and reiterate the purpose of the Clearinghouse. It does provide real-time access to violation information for drivers. So, if an employer needs to query the Clearinghouse to find out if a new hire has a prohibition in the Clearinghouse, then they would be able to go ahead and log into the Clearinghouse and conduct that query. So in addition to that is, if I was to report a violation on a driver today, then that would be available immediately. There is not a time delay. This also creates more difficulty for drivers to conceal their drug or alcohol program violations from employers. So I live in a tri-state area. So if I had a CDL in Virginia and I incurred a positive drug test violation and it was recorded into the clearinghouse. In the past, I could have gone to Maryland and gotten a new CDL and be able to conceal that violation from the new employer. The clearinghouse is making it much more difficult for drivers to be able to conceal that information since the employers are required to query the clearinghouse to get a real the current status of a driver. It is making it easier for the employers to meet their pre-employment investigation and reporting obligations since it is a centralized database. And then for the Fmcsa side, it is providing more insight into employer compliance with our drug and alcohol testing requirements. This all is leading to safer roadways. We just want to remind folks that there are two clearinghouse rules. The first rule was originally mandated by Congress under the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, or otherwise known as MAP 21. We published that rule in December 2016, and that rule established the requirements for the clearinghouse. We did implement the clearinghouse by January 6th of 2020. So, we're quickly approaching 2 years of implementation. This is really pretty exciting for us. One of the things that the initial rule did was require SDLAs to query the clearinghouse to check to see if a driver is prohibited or not prohibited before they completed a licensing transaction, issuance, renewal, transference, or upgrading an existing CDL. However, the first rule did not actually tell the SDLAs what they were supposed to do with the information. So with that being said, what Fmcsa did was publish a second rule, and that was published on October 7th of this year. And it is called the State Driver's Licensing Agency Non-Issuance Downgrade of Commercial Driver's License. It's a really big mouthful, so we're just calling it the second rule, or the Clearinghouse second rule. So you'll hear me referring to it throughout the presentation. The second rule was effective on November 8th, 2021, and then the implementation date is November 18th of 2024. And just to go ahead and clarify is that this second rule brings back to what we are asked the SDLAs to do. We are now actually asking the SDLAs to downgrade a license when they query the clearinghouse and they find out a driver is prohibited. So if they have a current CDL, then we would request that downgrade. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the next couple slides. So as I said, non-issuance. So if a driver is prohibited, we would ask that the SDLAs do not issue a new license or a new CLP. And if a driver was transferring from another state, not to complete that transaction. Also, the mandatory CLP and CDL downgrade, and there are certain time requirements in order to complete that downgrade. In addition, we clarified in the second rule the requirement that the states need to query CLP holders. It already existed in the clearinghouse, but it was a little vague, so we just went ahead and clarified the language. In addition to that, we're adding this CMV driving prohibition under Part 392. And then another big impact specifically to the drivers is the changes to actual knowledge violations and based on the issuance of a citation for DUI and a CMV. So basically what we're, and we'll get more in detail later on, but basically what we're trying to say is that if a driver was not convicted of a DUI while operating a CMV, then in the past, what the first rule allowed was that the driver's violation would get removed from the clearinghouse. The second rule is actually changing that in the fact that the violation will remain in the clearinghouse. The driver still has to complete a return to duty process. However, the driver will have an opportunity to petition Fmcsa to upload a evidentiary documentation showing that they were not convicted of the DUI. Just to touch on who's covered by the clearinghouse rule, it would be all CDL or CLP holders operating a CMV on the public roads, and then their employers and service agents. And we just provide a listing of some examples that the users would be included: interstate and intrastate motor carriers, as well as passenger carriers. We have school bus drivers, construction equipment operators, talking about municipalities, for example, waste management vehicles if they're operating those. We also want to go ahead and emphasize that federal and other organizations like local and state governments that employ drivers are subject to the drug and alcohol testing regulations. So we do have a lot of school districts and other local governments registered in the clearinghouse. Also, as a reminder, we just want to go ahead and say that government entities are not required to obtain a DOT number. However, they are subject to the drug and alcohol testing regulations under Part 382. We have a user roll card posted on the clearinghouse, so you can see it from the, once you get a copy of the presentation, you can click on the link and go to the job aid. We just want to go ahead and start talking about employer requirements. So just like every other user, they would be required to register in the clearinghouse. We do recommend that employers that have a DOT number and a Fmcsa portal account link their portal account to their clearinghouse account. This just actually helps registration in the fact that all the information that already exists at Fmcsa will just be pulled into the registration, and then the user doesn't they don't need to type in that information manually. But it is optional. If you decide that you don't want to link your portal account, then you would just have to answer the questions of whether you had a DOT number and a portal account. You would just need to respond with a no. Employers are also responsible for recording drug and alcohol program violations. This does include refusals and actual knowledge. In addition, they will need to query a driver to make sure that they're not prohibited from operating a CMV. And then there are two types of queries that are required. Those are pre-employment and annual queries. Excuse me. And then employers may designate a CTPA, a consortium third-party administrator, to act on their behalf in the clearinghouse. The functionalities that a TPA may have is to conduct queries or report violations and any related return to duty information. The employer would need to go ahead and specify what activities that the CTPA may complete for them. Just a note on the employers: if it's an owner-operator, they must designate a CTPA. For the driver requirements, again, they are required to register in the clearinghouse if they want to be able to view their information and to complete certain functions in the clearinghouse. They would need to add and then verify their CDL information in the clearinghouse, and by registering, they're going to be able to view any violation history and respond to any query consent requests. And if they do incur a violation, then they would be able to designate a SAP, or a substance abuse professional. We talked about what can they do responding to consent requests. So they, for full queries, which includes ad hoc full queries or pre-employment full queries, the consent does need to be provided in the clearinghouse, so they would need to be registered. And then violation information, when it is released with the consent, will include all details of whether it's a positive test or it's a refusal or actual knowledge. And then again, all of the associated return to duty information. In addition to that is designating the SAP so that the SAP can go ahead and report any RTD information that they're responsible for reporting. And then just a note is failure for the driver to provide that consent will result in that driver being prohibited from performing the safety sensitive functions for that employer. So if ABC Trucking requested consent for a pre-employment query for me and I declined it or just never responded, then I should be removed from safety sensitive functions at that time or not hired for a safety sensitive function until the employer gets that consent. We have medical review officers and substance abuse professional requirements. Both parties do need to register just as if you're a driver or a employer. During registration, both MROs and SAPs do self-certify that they meet all of the requirements under Part 40, and for MROs that would be 4121, and for SAPs that would be 4281. And then an MRO will report the positive, adulterated, and substituted drug tests and certain refusals. And we have a slide later on to go ahead and clarify what types of refusals MROs are responsible for reporting. And then SAPs, the driver, before a SAP can go ahead and report the applicable return to duty information, the driver must designate that SAP in the clearinghouse. And then they would just report the date of the initial assessment and the date that the driver was determined eligible for return to duty testing. All right, to touch on registering in the clearinghouse, everyone must have a login.gov account to register for the clearinghouse. Login.gov is just is a authentication service that we use. GSA does offer that service, and so when you register, there's a two-factor authentication, and it's basically establishing the user ID and password. We do recommend that when a user registers, that they don't select backup codes as their primary method of authentication. There's only 10 codes, and if you don't generate new codes before you use the 10th one, the user will lose access to their clearinghouse account, and they would have to delete their login.gov account and then re-register for the clearinghouse again. So again, we don't recommend using backup codes as a primary authentication. Once the user creates their login.gov account, then they would select the user role. So on your screen, you can see whether it's a driver, employer, SAP, MRO, or TPA. We also have the student driver role that we recently added to the clearinghouse. Excuse me. If an employer is registering and wanting to link their portal account, there's two paths. Again, is users with the portal account and then the non-portal users. If we do recommend, again, that if you have a portal account, that you do link the two accounts together. In order to link the two accounts in the portal account, you do need to request the appropriate role. So there is the DACH motor carrier role, which can query and report, and then there is the DACH motor carrier admin role, which can query, report, and designate a TPA. You would also indicate which type of carrier you are. If you're like, I'm going to say a regular carrier, or if you're an owner-operator where you're also the employer and the driver, or a driver. So to request an FMCSA account, just you can go to this link here and request that portal account first. And it's much easier in the order of things if you go ahead and request your role first, and make sure that your portal account is set up appropriately first before you try creating a Clearinghouse account and all that. So, because sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards again. So if you're registering without a portal account, again, you can do that. It's optional. We have a job aid specifically out there, and the main point of registering without a portal account, and a lot of people feel like they're lying, but it's okay. It's just say that you don't have a DOT number and you do not have a portal account, and then that will allow you to move forward in registering without the portal link. And then the an admin person will be able to register and invite any assistants. Assistants may be upgraded to an administrator role, and then each carrier account can have more than one admin or more than one assistant. To designate a TPA if they choose to designate one. And again, just a reminder that owner-operators are required to designate a TPA. You would just go ahead and you would be brought to the next screen to designate your CTPA. And basically, in the search field, what you're doing is just entering and typing in the name of your TPA as they registered. So, and then the search engine will go ahead and populate them in there, and then you would just select them and then click on the send button. We do remind people that employers should contact their TPA prior to sending them a designation in the clearinghouse. We do get emails from TPAs saying we received a designation request, but we don't know who they are. So it's really good to have that conversation before you try to designate a TPA. And then, of course, the employers need to select the actions that the TPA may take on their behalf. So that's reporting violations, querying the clearinghouse, reporting RTD information. So it could be one, it could be multiple actions. In addition to that, employers can go ahead and designate more than one CTPA. So we do have a lot of employers that will designate one TPA to just do queries and another one to handle the reporting of the violations and RTD information. Student drivers. So in December of 2016, there was a court case. We call it the Watson decision. There's the formal name, but we just keep it short. So basically what that did is clarified that a CDL school is not an employer of a student driver. So if I was to go to ABC Trucking School, I'm a student driver. The ABC Trucking School is not my employer. I am, as a student driver, basically my own employer. With that being said, we recently updated the clearinghouse to add on the student driver role. And so this allows them to register as a student driver. It allows them to designate a TPA in the clearinghouse, and then they're able to go ahead and do their pre-employment queries and all that kind of stuff for themselves. So we just wanted to go ahead and show you that this new functionality and new role in the clearinghouse. The student drivers must designate a TPA in order to comply with the testing and reporting requirements. In addition to that, the TPA may be the school. If ABC Trucking is still an employer for their instructors, just to clarify, but if they decided that they also wanted to be a TPA for student drivers, then they would need to go ahead and register for a second role, and that would be as a CTPA. All right, I had mentioned before that admins can go ahead and invite assistants, and so there, under the user account, there is an ability to invite assistants in the clearinghouse and upgrading those assistants to admin roles if required. Okay, so moving on to queries and consents. I had mentioned previously that there are two types of queries. There's pre-employment queries and there's annual queries. And basically a query is just going ahead and checking the clearinghouse to make sure that a driver is not prohibited due to a drug or alcohol violation. All queries do require driver consent. It's just going to depend on what kind of query you're doing, as to the type of consent that's required. Pre-employment queries are required for all newly hired CDL drivers. Just a reminder that there's a manual check that is still required for the prior 3 years, just because of the fact that the clearinghouse currently does not contain 3 years of information. And then with the annual query, it follows a rolling 12-month calendar. So for example, if I was to do a query today on John Smith, then the next annual query requirement would not be due until November 16th of 2022. But if I also did another query, say in December, it's going to roll so that if I did one in December, then the next time I would be required to do that query, it would be December of 22. Okay. So we talked about that depending on the type of query, it will determine the type of consent that's required. So if a company is doing an annual query, it requires limited consent. This consent is obtained outside of the clearinghouse by the employer. It could be done on an electronic or with an electronic or a wet signature, and it could be a one-time or it could be unlimited. We do recommend that if you're an employer that you might want to consider putting in there, so it would be like IG on Marshall, authorize ABC Trucking to do an annual query on me once a year for the duration of my employment. And so that provides frequency and the duration of how long that consent is good for. That also it makes it easier for an employer. They don't have to constantly go ahead and request consent from the driver. So if you want to go ahead and conduct a limited query more frequently, you might want to go ahead and say, put in there that you have the right to do a query 4 times a year or however frequent you want to do that. We do have a sample general consent form posted to the Clearinghouse website under our Learn tab and under the employer resources. For pre-employment queries, it is a full query. That full query will give all the details of the driver's record in the clearinghouse, and this requires specific consent, and it must be provided electronically in the clearinghouse. And every time a full query is conducted on a driver, the driver has to provide consent again. So it's only for the one time. And again, if a driver refuses consent, the query cannot be conducted and the driver is prohibited for operating for that specific employer. Just to touch base quickly on query plans, we just want to go ahead and show this is the query plan summary page. This is just showing here that 0 queries are conducted, there's 8 pending, but there's a query balance of 9,700. We also show the transaction history for the purchase of the queries. So anytime that you're looking for a receipt, you can go ahead and come to the query plan summary screen and click on the receipt link there. And just to remind you, all queries are $1.25 per query. It doesn't matter if it's a limited query or a full query. We also offer an unlimited query plan, and it's usually for usually the larger carriers take advantage of that. And so basically that plan is $24,999. So that, but they do have to purchase their query plan every year again. So it's not, unlimited forever. So every 12 months they would have to buy a new unlimited. If you purchase a query plan and you don't use all of them, they carry over. So if it's you purchase 10 and you only use 5, the remaining 5 will continue to carry over until you use them all. Payment is processed via pay.gov, which is another government service that allows payments. We don't record credit card information or banking information. We don't retain that in the clearinghouse. So it does need to be entered every time a query plan is purchased. The methods of payment include electronic funds transfer from a bank account, credit cards, and we accept the major credit cards, a debit card, and then we also allow digital wallet, which is Amazon Pay and PayPal. Just a note is that with Amazon Pay and PayPal, we are limited to 10,000 per transaction. So if you were going to purchase a unlimited query plan, you would not be able to do it using the digital wallet. We don't provide invoices or purchase orders, so the query plan, the payment must be provided at the time of the purchase. And also just a reminder that employers are required to purchase the query plan. CTPAs cannot purchase that query plan on behalf of the employer. And then if you conduct queries on behalf of more than one employer, each company must have its own query plan. So there are companies that have multiple sister companies that are associated to each other. So for every DOT number would need a query plan specific to them, because the queries need to be conducted under the specific DOT number that the driver is actually operating under. All right, to talk about conducting a query, the first step is to enter the driver information. That includes the driver's name, date of birth, the CDL number, and the state and country of issuance. This information is verified against Fmcsa systems, and there are 2 attempts in order to try to validate that driver's information. If after the second attempt that the information cannot be validated, then the query cannot be completed. And then we would recommend that you go back to the driver or the driver license information and just double check to make sure you're entering it correctly. Just a reminder to remove dashes and spaces in the CDL number when entering it for a query. Every state has a different format, so the queries are set up to go through if we do remove the dashes and the spaces. With Mexico, just a reminder for country of issuance and state of issuance, we would just ask that you enter Mexico for both country and for the state. Excuse me. All right, so when conducting a query, you're going to choose the query type. You can choose a limited. You can see that on the left-hand side of your screen. And then you're certifying that you obtained the driver's general consent for that query. On the right side of the screen, you can see that the full query has been selected there. And in addition to the standard information there, we are going to ask a question of whether that query is related to a pre-employment screening or not. And the reason why we ask that specific question is that we have a 30-day look back period. So if I was to go ahead and conduct a query on John Smith today, and it came back as not prohibited, but John Smith has been looking for a job with several other carriers, and he tested positive 2 weeks later for XYZ trucking. So what would happen is that positive test would get reported to the clearinghouse, and I would get a notification because it's within the last 30 days that there was new information about the driver in the clearinghouse. I could then go ahead and request a consent from the driver to conduct a full query so that I can get the details of that information. So that's why we ask you to check yes or no because of the 30-day look back. Once you click the conduct query, it will proceed. This is just talking about the limited query, and you just click on that button and you'll get a a response. So this is when you're manually submitting these queries. So you'll get a response on the right side of the screen. You see that the driver is not prohibited, and it asks you if you want to go ahead and conduct a new query. On the right side of the screen, you can see that it states that the records are found and a full query is needed, and then you can go ahead and send a consent request. Just a reminder that just because a record is found does not necessarily mean that the driver is actually prohibited from performing safety sensitive functions. It's possible that the driver had a violation and they went through their return to duty process, had gotten a negative RTD test, and they're no longer prohibited. So, if you really want the true status of the driver, you would be able to get that by doing the full query. For a full query, just after clicking the consent request, it's going to send a notification to the driver. If they're already registered, they're going to get an email notification that there's a query consent request pending for them. If they are not registered, we will send a physical letter via USPS to the address associated to the CDL. So whatever address of record that they have with the SDLA, we will send it to that address. So they don't, just a reminder as well, is that if the employer is speaking to the driver, you can just let them know, hey, I just sent you a consent request. You don't have to wait for the driver to actually get notified. And if the driver is not registered, you don't have to wait for them to get the letter in the mail. Just ask them to go ahead and register, and then they can go ahead and log in. The pending consent request will be there waiting for them once they have entered and verified their CDL information with their registration. For drivers, this is just a screen of what it looks like on their dashboard when they get a consent request. So as you can see right here, it's saying that there's a consent request pending, and they can either click on the consent button or I do not consent button. For this is just a screen with the query results for a full query. If you, as you can see, it lists all the information. It has all the driver's information here, who conducted the query, and when the request was sent and then recorded. And then if you click on the query details, you can see that all the details of the query will be viewable. So you'll get, in this particular instance, the driver tested, it was a refusal for a random test, and they failed to appear for any test. So you'll see all that information in the Clearinghouse. And then again, this is just the driver's view of the violation information. So if they clicked on the view of violation details, they would also see this information, and that is what's going to be released to the employer. All right, next we're going to go ahead and talk about reporting violations in the Clearinghouse. This table goes ahead and shows what information an employer or a CTPA is responsible for reporting to the Clearinghouse. So an alcohol confirmation test with a concentration of 0.04 or higher. And then we have refusals to test for alcohol or for controlled substances. So both of those fall under Part 40 with 4261 and 4191. So it will go ahead and give specific details of the types of refusals that they would report to the Clearinghouse. In addition to that, they are responsible for reporting actual knowledge. It does include the use of alcohol on duty, 4 hours before coming on duty, and any prior to post-accident testing, as well as any controlled substances use. And then in addition to violation information, they are responsible for reporting the negative return to duty test results for both drug and alcohol testing, and then also the completion of a follow-up testing plan. We just want to kind of touch on what actual knowledge is and what it isn't. So it is based on the employer's direct observation of an employee. It's information that is provided by a driver's previous employer. And then it also is a traffic citation for driving a CMV under the influence of drugs or alcohol. It's also an employee's admission of alcohol or controlled substance use, unless it falls under 383.21. So just it's really important that it's direct observation of an employee. We do want to stress that. We do have drivers who have petitioned the Fmcsa for some of the violations that are reported. And we later find out that it's a coworker that observed the driver possibly smoking something in the truck, but we don't really know what. It wasn't a direct observation of the employer. It was just a coworker. So it's really important that the correct violation is reported to the clearinghouse. Just a reminder that verified positive drug tests does not fall under actual knowledge. We get a lot of times we have employers reporting a positive drug test as actual knowledge. Amaros are required to report the positive drug test. And so what this ends up doing is a duplication of violations are reported in the clearinghouse, and Fmcsa would need to remove one of the actual knowledge one. And then just reporting actual knowledge, employers are required to upload supporting documentation. That documentation does include notification for reporting to the task and details of the date and the time and the location of where they're supposed to report is really important. Any emails or text messages between the employer and the driver could also support the reporting of the violation. And then documents of termination or resignation must be included as well. And then speaking about MROs and SATs, the information that they need to report, again, MROs must report the positive adulterated or substituted drug test results, refusals to test for controlled substances that fall under 4191, and those violations must be reported within 2 business days, as well as it's possible that a positive test was reported to the clearinghouse. The MRO finds out later that the driver had a valid prescription, so the MRO would need to request the removal of the violation within 1 business day of making the change of the determination of the positive test. And then for SAPs, they would just need to report the date of the initial assessment and the date that the driver was determined eligible for return to duty testing. Both of those events must be reported by the close of the business day following the date of the event. And then the types of refusals, we wanted to just go ahead and highlight the type of refusals that employers are responsible for reporting and what MROs are responsible for reporting. As you can see, MROs have a very limited number of types of refusals. What we are finding is that MROs are reporting types of refusals that an employer would be required to report. So what generally that requires is Fmcsa will reach out to the MRO or their assistant and request that they remove that violation, and then we have to reach out to the employer and let them know that that was a violation that they should have reported. And so then the employer would need to go ahead and report that violation. So it's really important that we do ensure that we have proper reporting. If for some reason, some part of the violation was reported incorrectly, we do have an edit function in the clearinghouse. So basically, the user just goes to their dashboard, goes to their violations tab, and then the violation history for the specific driver, and then they would click on the view violation details. If you entered the violation in error, then it can. There's a button to request the removal of the violation. We ask that you provide a detailed explanation as to why that violation should be removed, and then Fmcsa will review that request and determine whether it should be removed or not. If the Cdl information needs to be updated, the violation will need to be removed and then re-entered. Is the only portion of the violation report that cannot be edited. To edit the violation, just click on the little pencil icon, as you can see here on the screen, and it will go to the particular section that of the violation report that you need to edit, and then you would just go ahead and continue through and save those corrections. You will be asked, if you request to remove the violation again, to provide a detailed reason why. And truly, the more details that you provide for that reason for removal, makes it easier for us to go ahead and say, oh, okay, we can remove that violation. But if there's holes in the explanation and we don't completely understand, then that would require us to reach out to whoever is requesting that removal to get additional information. Drivers do have an option to challenge information that has been reported to them or about them in the Clearinghouse. The information that can be challenged is the accuracy of the information reported, like a data entry error that maybe the type of drug was incorrectly reported that they tested positive for, but it's usually an administrative type error. And then the accuracy of test results and refusals may not be challenged. So a lot of times we get a driver who will go ahead and submit a petition, and they said the positive test needs to be removed because I don't do drugs. Well, they can't that's not a valid challenge to the violation report. So we would go ahead and dismiss that. In order for them to submit a petition, they would just submit that petition through Fmcasa's data key system. We'll review that petition and then notify the driver of our decision of whether we're going to remove it, retain it, correct the information, and what the reason is for that decision. If the driver believes that we made an error in our decision, they can go ahead and submit a request for an administrative review. The administrative review is completed by a senior official in the agency, and they would go ahead and review all the documentation and the explanation of why they believe that Fmcsa made that error. And again, the driver is informed of the decision. When an administrative review is completed, it does constitute as the final agency action. So there's not another appeal process there for the petition. All right, so we just want to cover a couple of FAQs. The return to duty process, we just want to kind of reiterate, did not change with the implementation of the Clearinghouse. The couple things that the Clearinghouse did require the drivers to do is to designate the SAP in the Clearinghouse, and just a reminder that the employers are still required to provide that driver with a list of potential SAPs, and the SAP is going to enter the dates about the initial assessment and the eligibility for return to duty. The driver will need to take a return to duty test, and then once they have a negative test results, those are recorded by the employer or their designated CTPA. And then we get a lot of times questions about the follow-up testing plan, if it's going to be in the Clearinghouse, and it will not be. Any information that's recorded in the Clearinghouse about a driver would be accessible by that driver. And of course, we don't want the drivers to know when their follow-up tests are supposed to be. All right, so just a quick little blurb on the side about a revised CCF. So in August of 2020, the OMB approved a revised a federal CCF. So as of August 30th, the employers must use that new CCF. And one of the major changes on the CCF does specify Cdl information, because I don't know that I mentioned it, but the Clearinghouse does not record Social Security numbers and employee identification numbers. We do have to associate everything with the CDL number. All right, and then just moving on to talk about inspections and what to do at roadside. So the first thing is roadside is determining if a driver is prohibited due to a drug or alcohol violation. Just want to point out that we have a CVSA bulletin posted. It was revised in September of 2021, and you can access it at the link that you see on your screen. We ask that officers conduct a query in the SIDList gateway or Inquiry Central. And if you receive a prohibited status, that you would cite 390.3E as this is an out-of-service violation. In the future, we are going to add a new violation at 392.1.15, and that was as a result of the Clearinghouse rule. For investigation and audits for federal users, in order to access the Clearinghouse, you must access it using your portal credentials, and then you can view carrier's registration, any queries conducted, and violations information. So federal users are able to access the Clearinghouse directly. State users, they would still use Query Central or the SIDList gateway to see if a driver is prohibited from performing those safety-sensitive functions. You can request proof of registration inquiries that the employer has conducted from either the employers or you can go to the division office and then they could print off the compliance report. Employers must be able to produce copies of the Clearinghouse information for an investigator if it's requested. All right, so to touch on some common issues, we talked about login.gov before. One of our main issues is cannot access their account. The user forgot their user ID and password. They can't receive their security code. They can't access the backup codes. The easiest solution is to delete their login.gov account and then re-register. If they just need to update an email address, but they can still access their account, they would just log into the link there, scroll down to the login information, and then click on add email. And then once that new email address is added, then they would go ahead and delete the old one. Change their authentication method. Say, for example, they do have backup codes. They realize that that is a terrible choice, and so they want to go ahead and change it to getting a text message to their cell phone. So they would just go ahead and log into the link and then scroll down to add or edit their two-factor authentication. And if they need any kind of assistance, they would need to go to login.gov to request that assistance. Unfortunately for us, login.gov is a separate service, and so Fmcsa has very limited assistance, or we're very limited in the assistance that we can actually provide. I guess that's a better way of saying it. Okay, registration. An employer, if they register for an incorrect role, they registered as a CTP and not an employer. So they would just need to reach out to Fmcsa and request that we delete their account, and then they can re-register. And when we delete their account, it's the Clearinghouse portion of the account. It is not actually the login.gov account, so they can actually reuse their user ID and password. They registered as an assistant and not as an admin. So if they're linked to portal, they would just need to go back into their portal account and update their role. They would change it from DACH motor carrier to DACH motor carrier admin. If they're not linked to portal, then the employer admin must upgrade that assistant to an admin, and that admin person would just go to their dashboard and manage users, and then they would be able to do the upgrade there. If an employer registered as a driver and the employer is only an employer and not a driver, then contact Fmcsa. We'll delete your account, and then the user would just re-register with the correct role. If an employer is both an employer and a driver, if they have a portal account, they can just go to their driver profile and then click on the link that says link your portal account. If they are not linked to portal, then they would need to contact Fmcsa to delete their account, and then they can re-register with the correct role. Or and if they're if they registered first as a driver, they could just add their Cdl information. Okay. So reporting violations, they would just go to my dashboard to the violations and then click report violation. Again, we just want to reiterate that it's, and the first step of all that is entering the driver's name, date of birth, and CDL number and getting it verified against the system. If for some reason with the reporting of the violations, it still doesn't validate after the second attempt, it's okay. Click the next button, and then what will happen is you'll be prompted to finish reporting the violation, and then the violation will just be flagged for Fmcsa, and we will work on trying to correct the CDL information and making sure that it gets associated to the correct driver. When an employer cannot conduct queries, check to make sure that you actually purchased a query plan, and if you purchased one, that there are queries available. If none are available, just make sure you purchase a new one. Ensure that you're entering the correct CDL information. Again, remove spaces and hyphens from the CDL number. If a state like North Carolina has leading zeros, they'll usually have 4 to 5 leading zeros. Make sure you include those, enter the correct date of birth. I'm going to honestly say that we do get a lot of emails saying it's not working, and we find out that they entered in the wrong date of birth. Mexican licenses, enter Mexico for both the country and state. One of the things that we have found is that a driver may go ahead and upgrade their license or change their licensing information, and then they'll immediately go into the clearinghouse and try to revalidate, or an employer will try to conduct a query. The states are actually allowed 10 business days to update a driver's record on their side, and so we just ask that you allow the states that opportunity to try to update the records before reaching out. Another big thing is ensuring the CDL is not expired. We get we get told that again that the CDL won't validate, and then when we ask for a copy of the CDL, we find out that it had already expired, and it won't validate with an expired CDL. And making sure that the driver has not obtained a CDL in a different state, and ensure that the driver actually possesses the CDL or CLP. A lot of times we will get a driver who has not obtained at least a CLP trying to register in the clearinghouse, and it won't validate. And it's because they don't have one. Clearinghouse is only applicable if you have a CDL or a CLP. We talked about conducting queries earlier, and I walked you through the manual process or submitting a query individually. The employers do have an ability to upload a bulk query using a spreadsheet or an alternate file type. Just ensure that the template format is correct. Do not include middle names. Don't include any suffixes such as senior, junior, first, second, etc. That the date of birth format is correct. It does need to be month, day, and then the four digits for the year. The spaces before and after text in a data field. Sometimes we find out, like in an Excel spreadsheet, that somebody inserted a space before and after, so that will affect the validation. And then ensure the state and country codes are correct. And verify that you have an available balance sufficient for the number of queries you're trying to conduct, meaning that if you only have 50 queries available but you're trying to submit 100, it won't go through because you don't have enough to process all of them. And then we have the instructions and the template available posted to the website. For drivers, registering as an incorrect role, if the driver is only a driver and not an employee, then contact Fmcsa and we'll delete the account, and the driver can go ahead and re-register under the correct role. If a user is both a driver and an employer, then all they need to do is go to their dashboard, their employer profile, and just add their CDL information. Basically, this is the same information about validating a CDL. And then if they cannot provide consent, make sure that the driver has actually entered and validated their CDL. A lot of times we'll go ahead and say that we'll get emails saying that the driver can't find a query consent. And that's usually because they never entered and validated their CDL information. Everything's tied to the CDL. Ensure that the employer submitted the actual query. That's another thing, is that the driver thinks that they're going to get a consent request, but the employer never actually submitted it. All right, so We're approaching the end of the presentation, but we wanted to highlight some of the statistics that we do have posted to the website. We do post a monthly report on the Clearinghouse Learn tab, and if you scroll about midway point of the screen to the news and events, you will see all of our monthly reports posted there. As of October 1st, we had over 2.6 million registrations, and in the table you can go ahead and see the breakout of our 5 major types of the 5 user groups. So you can see for drivers total since 2019, there's 2.3 million drivers registered and then 282,000 employers registered. So here we have violation information that we want to share with you. This first screen here is just speaking about drug or controlled substances violations. They do include the actual knowledge, the drug test refusals, and the positive test. And then the first 2 columns is a year-to-year comparison between 2020 and 2021. And so in 2020, we had 44,000 drug-related violations reported, and as of October 1st, we were at 36,000. And then the next 2 bars is comparing September 2020 with September 2021. So you can see that we're pretty close to being on par with last year's numbers. And then in addition to that, we have the violation data for alcohol-related types of violations. Again, we're doing a year-to-year comparison and then month-to-month or a monthly comparison based on previous and past year. Overall, you can see that between drug and alcohol violations, we've had over 98,000 violations reported since the Clearinghouse was implemented. This table is just going ahead and highlighting the controlled substances that drivers are testing positive for. As you can see, marijuana is the highest substance that drivers are testing positive for, and then the next one is cocaine. So this is since implementation of the Clearinghouse through October 1st. So, all right. So before we go ahead and start taking some questions, we just want to go ahead and direct you to the Clearinghouse Learning Center. We do have a lot of resources, FAQs, job aids. The resources are generally broken down by the specific user groups. So if you see something that might be missing that would be useful, please let us know. We're always looking to improve our website to make it easier for people. And then if you have any questions, please email us at clearinghouse@dot.gov, or you can call for assistance at the 844 number. We do have a customer service line. Okay.
G, are you ready?
I think so. I was seeing in the corner of my eye a lot of things going on with the chat, so I'm a little scared, but...
I tried to, there was a few that I think are duplicate questions or are asking the same thing, so I'll try to skip through those because I believe they will be answered. But we're going to go back in the way they were received, the order they were received, so that the mindset will go back to the beginning and then work our way through. So the first question is, can state law enforcement officers that conduct compliance investigations for the Fmcsa be allowed to register with the DAC? And it was another follow-up question set because your presentation stated that state LE, but the Clearinghouse login says Fmcsa and SDLA personnel. So you want to address that one?
Okay, so SDLAs can register with the Clearinghouse, and it would be through portal and have access to the Clearinghouse. It would just be a specific portal role in the Clearinghouse for the SDLAs. We recommend that if you are interested in having that access now before you implement the requirements under the second rule, then just reach out to Fmcsa at the email address provided, and we will assist you in getting your portal role set up so that you can have that access now and you can query before you do a licensing transaction. For state partners, unfortunately right now, the way the original rule was written, we cannot provide that direct access to the clearinghouse. So that's where the Query Essential and Cdl Gateway comes into play for you to be able to query to look for the prohibited or not prohibited status of a particular driver.
Okay, and then I believe there were a couple questions on a violation being double reported. So can a violation be double reported? Carrier and medical MROs, medical review officers, can both of them report?
So MROs are responsible for reporting positive tests, adulterated and substituted tests. Okay, so employers are not responsible for reporting those. So if an employer would report that, it would be considered a duplicate and then it would be removed. It gets confusing with the types of refusals. So for example, one of the things that we see on a regular basis is the MRO will go ahead and report a refusal to test because the driver failed to stay on site. Well, it may not have been what they that is a type of refusal that an employer would normally report. But for example, if it really was, if the driver failed to stay on site because he didn't, he completed his child bladder procedures and still wasn't able to go ahead and proceed with giving the full specimen, then sufficient specimen, then that refusal should be maybe due to a medical, not due to a medical reason instead of just failing to stay on site. So there's little nuances, and when you see when you get a copy of the presentation, go to the table that has the types of refusals, and you can clearly see the differentiation between what an employer reports for those refusals and what an MRO does.
Okay, and there's some additional questions that are coming in. I think that kind of tie on top of that. So I'll just jump into that one real quick. So if the MRO reports a positive alcohol test and the employer does not, will it still show up in the portal account?
It will not. Okay. The MRO and the employer has separate reporting requirements. So for an employer to see a positive test, they would actually need to query the clearinghouse and request the driver's consent. Once the driver provides that consent, then that positive test information would be released to the employer.
Okay. And how are negative but diluted tests treated in the clearinghouse?
So negative tests, the only negative test that is reported to the clearinghouse is a negative return to duty test. If there's a diluted test, then you would identify the controlled substance that they tested positive for, and then there's also a checkbox for dilute.
Okay. And this question came in before you addressed it in the presentation, but we'll just verify. So before running the query, is it accurate that a consent form on file for each driver is required?
So that would be for a limited query. So if an employer is just doing annual queries and it's a limited query, that's not going to that doesn't turn into a full query. Sometimes that happens. And then yes, the employer is required to maintain a copy of that consent form on in their office or in the driver's record. Just to be clear is just make sure that you do include the frequency and the duration of that consent. So if you just say, if the form just says, Gian Marshall provides me consent to run an annual query, then that is just a one-time consent. All right. If you go ahead and put it, if the consent request says Gian Marshall provides consent for ABC Trucking to conduct a query 4 times a year, a limited query 4 times a year for the duration of my employment, then ABC Trucking can go ahead and conduct that limited query 4 times a year for however long I'm employed by them. and then you don't have to get another one.
Okay. And so there was some request to clarify the owner-operators that are leased onto a company need to designate a CTPA even if the company they are leased onto has a CTPA assigned, and then there was kind of a follow-up question later on by someone else that says, can you clarify owner-operator? Is it an owner where he or she is the only driver, or is it the owner drives regardless if there's other drivers? So maybe the first one and then address the clarification of the owner-operator.
Okay, I think I'm going to start the other way.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. An owner-operator is an employer, and they also drive for their own company. So, you know, if my company was ABC Trucking, I'm the owner of that company, and I also drive. So that's what defines what an owner-operator is. Now, for registration purposes and what is required, if I go ahead and work for, I think Brian Price is on. So if Brian Price has a company, Brian Price Trucking, then even though I'm an owner operator, but I'm working under Brian's operating authority, then I could just register as a driver. There's no need for me to register as an employer. However, if I'm operating under my own authority, then I would need to register as an employer and as a driver, and that would define me as an owner-operator. And there is a little checkbox on the profile for an employer that says I'm an owner-operator. You check that, and then you have to designate a CTPA.
Okay. And Brian and Nikki are both on, so if you wish to turn your cameras on and unmute, you're more than welcome to chime in as well. Okay, so then the next one was, I thought the SDLAs are required to check the clearinghouse prior to issuing a CLP or CDL. Is there another requirement that we are unaware of?
Well, the second rule just recently came out. It was published in October, and it became effective in November. So there are additional requirements for the SDLA that they're going to be downgrading and CDLs once the SDLA queries the clearinghouse and finds out the driver is prohibited. Now, that implementation to be able to go ahead and do that downgrade and to be able to receive the information from the clearinghouse to complete those actions, the compliance date for that is November of 2024. So there's going to be multiple stages.
Okay. I think this might be a follow-up question. I'm going back and forth from these questions that I had moved over into a document so I could read them a little easier rather than the chat. So this one was, as a state partner, how am I supposed to find out why or when someone became prohibited in order to do my report properly, along with having the proper violations in AIM?
Okay, so in order for you to be able to get the appropriate information, one of the things is that the employers have the ability to download a compliance report. So when you're doing an investigation or an audit, you can ask the employer for a copy of that report. If the employer refuses to, so let me back up a minute. The compliance report will have all the information about the carrier's activity in the clearinghouse. So their pre-employment and annual queries, the types of the information that they get back, all of that will be in the compliance report, as well as like if they have a designated TPA and all that kind of stuff, all the listed users under that company. So if you can't get that compliance report from the employers, then you can always reach out to your division and request that they download that information as well. And then you always have the option of reaching out to the clearinghouse team at our email address, and we will go ahead and provide any information. I'm going to go ahead and just say straight out that Washington State, hands down, has been fantastic. I can guarantee you that we get a request for that compliance report or additional information at least 2 or 3 times a day from somebody from Washington State. So at any point in time, you can go ahead and request additional information. We've had other states reach out to us because, say, for example, a driver got pulled over at roadside and they were placed out of service. So now they've gone ahead and submitted a data request change to get that out of service violation removed. And what we find out is that the driver or employer is claiming that the driver wasn't really prohibited. But we found out that the employer, by looking into the Clearinghouse team, we can see when that negative return to duty test was reported. So the driver may have been prohibited at the time of the when they were pulled over at roadside. So we're able to go ahead and provide all the information to anybody who inquires it, as long as it is relevant to the enforcement activity.
Okay, is it correct that violations in the clearinghouse are recorded under the driver and not the carrier?
That is correct. The violations are associated to the driver. Employers and drivers are not linked in the clearinghouse because one is the drivers could work for multiple companies. They could leave somebody. It would be a huge data burden for employers to have to constantly update their driver list if we were to link the drivers and the carriers. So everything all that violation information is associated by the CDL numbers.
Okay. And then there was a question about last year, the clearinghouse would not recognize licenses that started with a 0. Has this been fixed? They had to enter that in manually on the bulk upload feature. So has that been corrected that you're aware of?
Yeah, we've made a number of updates and enhancements to be able to go ahead and process and validate the CDLs. Unfortunately, not every state has the same formatting of CDLs, and at any time a state could go ahead and change their formatting. So we have certain rules that will go ahead and connect and link CDLs and also accommodate the fact of whether a 0 is missing or not. It's preferable that you go ahead and continue to enter the CDL number with all the digits or characters of the CDL number, but we do have tools in place that will go ahead and do it anyway.
Okay. As a state partner, prohibited, not prohibited, only helps at the moment that you are checking. When conducting an investigation, we need to know if they were prohibited during the audit period and the beginning and end dates of the prohibition. How are we supposed to find this?
You can just reach out to Fmcsa, to the Clearinghouse team, and request additional information.
If a driver gets a DUI in their personal vehicle, since it does impact their CDL, CLP, will this show up in the clearinghouse?
No, only DUIs while operating a CMD should be reported to the Clearinghouse. If they're just driving their personally owned vehicle, it doesn't apply.
And then another one just came in, I think, to follow through with that was, as a state partner conducting new entrant safety audits, will I ever gain access to the clearinghouse to verify registrations and queries?
As of right now, no, it is a rulemaking change. So it's something that we do have on our list of things of what we can update, so we do have a list of things that we are wanting to either clarify or try to change in upcoming rulemaking. So this is something that we have added to our list. We understand and we think that, it should be where, as a state partner, you should be able to have that access. Unfortunately, we just do have the restrictions of the first rule.
Okay. I think this kind of falls into, again, the roles, but why are government entities required to do this? And maybe I don't know the reason behind that question, if there's maybe a little bit more. Maybe you understand some of the meat behind that question. Maybe not, but whoever asked that question, I can go back and look. If you want to unmute and verify or clarify your question, please go ahead and do that. I did open it up so you can unmute and ask your questions if I'm not getting them correctly the way you're wording them.
Just to generally answer the question, government entities do hire CDL and CLP holders, and so they are still subject to drug and alcohol testing requirement.
Okay. And then just to clarify the personal vehicle DUI question again, in their own personal vehicle, this will not be reported or have a negative impact on their CDL, I think. Okay,
so it will not be reported to the Clearinghouse.
Clearinghouse, yep.
Whether it has a negative impact on their CDL, I think that is other regulations and the state.
Agreed. Okay. As a school, they have a student that has been given the return to duty status. This student is doing follow-up testing, but will graduate soon. Does the employer that driver goes to work for then administer the RTD pathway?
Sorry, can you just clarify, reread that question again, Chris?
So there's a student who is going through driver school right now and has been given return to duty status. The student is doing some follow-up testing, but is set to graduate relatively soon. So the employer that student is going to be working for, would they administer his return to duty pathway?
Yes, they would go ahead and administer the follow-up testing plan. And then once the follow-up testing plan has been completed, then they would report the completion date.
Okay. Then there was, I think, something with the regulation here. So SDLAs, are they downgrading per 382.725?
Nikki, I'm gonna punt.
She may have popped off. I don't see her at the top anymore.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to apologize for not getting the specific regulation. So if that's something that I can go ahead and come back to you guys later on, I can provide that answer to Brenda and to let you guys know.
Okay. Brian unmuted. So Brian, are you going to chime in on that?
I was only going to chime in to say that I also don't have the exact regulatory site in front of me, but I think G did cover, obviously, the bottom line is that under the Clearinghouse 2 rule, the SDLAs will be downgrading licenses when a driver has a violation reported to the Clearinghouse. But again, like G said, we'll just have to get back to you with the exact regulatory site from the new rulemaking.
Yeah. Okay. And then there was another one as far as the employee's admission. That's again, I think another regulatory question. It's 382.121.
So there's a employer's admission, yes, under 121, and then but there's certain exceptions to that. So in the Clearinghouse, what I think the question is pertaining to when I was talking about the actual knowledge, and that there are certain employer admissions. So, for example, we've seen reports where the employer will say, "Well, I was talking to the driver and I told them that they needed to report for a random drug test." But the driver told me, "Can we postpone this a few days because I'm not going to pass the test." I had a really good weekend. So that would be an employer's admission, and that would fall under a refusal to test, right? It's a type of refusal. If somebody, just, on a random Tuesday says to their employer, "You know what, I really need help. Okay, so, I have a controlled substance abuse problem and I really need help." Well, there's no test that they were supposed to go specifically for on that given day. It's just that they're seeking assistance. So that would fall under 382.121 as an employee's admission, but there's company policy type actions that apply there versus an actual violation being reported to the Clearinghouse.
Okay. I think just a quick Clearinghouse question, because I think this one's going to be easy to answer. So will the Clearinghouse recognize another user for the company when the current administrator retires or resigns? The emails will differ. So how do they go about doing that?
Okay, so it depends on how they're registered. Let's go ahead and use Brian. If Brian, as the employer admin, is registered and he's linked to a portal account, what would happen is that the successor would need to also create a Clearinghouse account and link to their own portal account. So the Clearinghouse account will only link to a single portal account, so multiple users of a portal account cannot link to a second Clearinghouse account. All right, so it's very important when it's a person that's linked that has a portal account that they have their own. I know a lot of times what happens is companies share their single portal account. Really not good for IT security. So I think but the way the Clearinghouse is set up, you can't have multiple users linking to the same portal account. If you are not linked to portal account, what is recommended is a couple of things. One is make sure you have maybe multiple admins, because just in case somebody leaves unexpectedly, it makes things a whole lot easier, because that second admin can send an invitation to the successor, and they can complete the registration, and everything is linked to a singular, I'm going to say singular account, but they're all linked together. Okay. But if it doesn't happen and you have forewarning, then whoever the existing admin is, they could send the invitation that way. If for some reason the person leaves unexpectedly, there's not another admin, you just create another employer admin account, and then you reach out to Fmcsa. We can actually merge those two accounts together, and you'll see the history, the query balance, all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Will there be an API coming?
We have not taken it off the board. We still are considering the API. However, we do have some other priorities, so we're working towards those first.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go back over to this side. And do our existing CDL drivers need to go in and register, or do we, the employer, need to register each of those drivers?
Okay, so every user needs to register themselves. All right, so employers are not going to register their drivers, and mainly because of the fact that it is a security issue. User IDs and passwords should not be shared, and the employers shouldn't be able to just access their driver's account. All right. Okay. Also, just to be clear, is that drivers are not required to register. They do have to register if they're going to go do certain things in the Clearinghouse. If they want to go ahead and review their record or any information that's reported about them in the Clearinghouse, they need to be registered. If they need to provide consent, so they could be a driver that is looking for another job, right? So electronic consent for a pre-employment query. So they need to be able to go ahead and register in the Clearinghouse to provide that electronic consent in the Clearinghouse for the pre-employment query. The other reason is if the driver has a violation, they need to be registered in order to designate that SAP in the Clearinghouse. So otherwise, a driver does not need to be registered. I mean, if a driver's been with a company for 20 years or never planning on leaving until they retire, they don't have any drug or alcohol violations, there's no need for them to be registered.
Okay. And then along those lines, what if the CDL number changes or the driver moves to another state and gets a new CDL? How does the Clearinghouse follow them?
So the states do list aliases for a driver's license, and we do go through CIDList to validate the CDLs. And what we do is link the old and the new CDLs through the aliases that the states provide in their information when we do a query.
Okay, and can a driver become an employer without deleting their account?
Yes, they would just go to the driver profile, and then there should be a link in the upper right-hand corner that says link to my portal account.
Okay, and then how does an employer get a follow-up plan or know where the driver is on the plan if the previous employers are out of business?
We would recommend that you reach out to the SAP that has been providing services to the driver and request the follow-up testing plan from them.
Okay. Let's see. What types of queries need to be run on student drivers?
So the student driver would need to do their own pre-employment query. So, if they're going to to ABC trucking school, they've registered as a student driver, they're able to go ahead and do a pre-employment query on themselves to show that they don't have any kind of prohibition. And then if the school requires that as part of enrollment, they can just go ahead and do a screenshot or whatever to provide that information to the school.
Okay, and when will the Clearinghouse be the one and only for background checks on previous employer verifications?
That'll be January 6, 2023. So realistically, it's only a little bit over a year left, y'all.
Okay, if an employee admits to drug use after taking the random screen and the test comes back negative, should the employer report this to the Clearinghouse as actual knowledge?
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Why would they admit to drug use after their test came back negative? I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Test them right there. Test them on the spot. Okay. Does the SAP? Okay, the SAP doesn't know how many tests have been completed. I think that was a follow-up to maybe what you had just talked with the SAP. So, there was a question. I'm gonna call Todd out. Todd, you had said you have a question as you're running your annuals tomorrow, but then you had followed up with another question. With the 0, is that the question you had? If you had an additional question, feel free to either unmute and ask that question or type it in, and I'll try to address that right away.
Can you hear me? Okay?
Yep.
Yeah, that was it. Last year I uploaded like, I don't know, I think it was like 255 or something like that. And every license number that began with a 0, it did not recognize it. So then I had like 53 that I had to run manually. So follow up, I think you got it. It sounded like Jan said that the system has been updated to recognize those numbers.
for the most part, yes. I mean, there's certain states, depending on who it is. It could. Just curious, are you from Georgia?
No, Colorado.
Okay, I know Georgia, we have a little bit more difficulty in allowing, if it's missing that 0, it's not going to go through. But can you do me a favor and send me an email with your document to clearinghouse@dot.gov? We can look at that document and see why, and then also look at your account and then try to figure out why it didn't go through.
Well, that was last year, December 1st.
Oh.
I'm going to run these again tomorrow for my this will be my second limited annual for my whole group. So I'll run them tomorrow morning and see where we end up. And then if there's any issues, maybe I can contact you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Todd. All right. If the MRO reports the positive alcohol test and the employer does not, will it still show up in our portal, the portal account?
The MRO wouldn't be able to report the positive alcohol test. Only an employer is able to report a positive alcohol test.
Okay. So I think that would probably clarify that question then. Let's see. Rick, did you have a question? No? Okay. Is there a step-by-step help for the clearinghouse use? Some of them find it very difficult to navigate, and the portal as well. So is there any step-by-step guides people can use that are available to them?
I mean, it really depends on what action you're trying to complete in the clearinghouse, but we have a number of job aids for employers, and I'm assuming that she's an employer. So if you go to the clearinghouse Learn Center and go down to where it says employer, click on that. We call them vertical blinds because they go like this. If you click on it, it will open up and you will see a whole listing of job aids. So if, for example, if you're having a hard time with registration, there's a registration job aid. If you're trying to do a query, we have a query job aid. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, we try to break out those job aids as singular topics rather than having a huge document that you have to kind of weed through, try to figure things out. So if you can't find your answer through the job aids or through an FAQ on the website, just reach out to the clearinghouse and we can try to go ahead and provide that assistance to you. With Portal, I don't know that there is a user guide. It's a different group at Fmcsa, so I don't have the answer for that.
Okay, and then unless something else comes in, once a query is initiated, what is the elapsed time frame for the individual to receive the consent prompt in the clearinghouse, and is it instantaneous?
Okay, so I think I mentioned earlier, if they're registered in the clearinghouse, it's there. So as soon as you go ahead and submit that query, it should show up in their clearinghouse account. Now, just note that they do need to make sure that they have entered and validated their CDL, make sure that they have their current CDL entered and validated, and it should be, like I said, it should be already there displayed on their dashboard. If they are not registered in the clearinghouse, then they're going to get a physical letter. So that could take a minimum of 2 weeks before they get it, and if they're on the road, they might not ever get it. And on top of that, if if the address of record with their CDL is incorrect, they'll never get that letter. So we really recommend communication between the employer and the driver. So you don't have to wait for that notification. You could literally just tell the driver, hey, I just submitted a consent request. Go log into your account and it should be there.
Okay, I'm a mess. My little sticky note that I keep under my keyboard, I spilled coffee on it. I can't find my password. You know, I have all my passwords written on that. I can't find my password, and it's been a really long time since I've logged in. Also in the process, I've changed my name. So how do I go about that?
Oh, wow. I thought you were really talking about yourself there, Chris. I was like, wow. I thought you were telling me we can do any more questions because you couldn't get back into your Okay. If you cannot access your Clearinghouse account whatsoever for any number of one of those reasons, then the best possible way is to just create a new Clearinghouse account. Hopefully, maybe you might have another email address that you can use and you can just re-register using a new one. Otherwise, there are steps. And in one of the slides when we talked about login.gov and common issues, there's a link to the instructions on login.gov page on how to go ahead and delete the existing account, and then you have to wait 24 hours and then you can create the new account.
Okay. And then just a final question here then is there any way that the Clearinghouse can cooperate and partner with the DMVs a little bit more? So that way someone gets a CDL and then they automatically have to register at the Clearinghouse simultaneously. So maybe just a suggestion or maybe some future partnering ideas to have the two communicating with each other a little bit more frequently to get that next step to happen. So I don't know if that's something you're working on, but.
Well, you know what? I appreciate that suggestion. We are always very open to furthering our relationships with our partners. And so if there is a better way of being able to go ahead and getting people to register and to comply with our regulations, I'm very open to that. So I'm going to go ahead and jot down that suggestion and see how we can approach increasing our partnership to allow that.
Okay. And then before any more of you happen to drop off, there's been a couple of questions that have come in about the link for tomorrow. It is the same link that you used for today. It'll be the same link you use for tomorrow. So if you inadvertently deleted it, just use the same link you used for today, and that'll be the same link for tomorrow. Again, just as a reminder, if you are sitting in a group, and to clarify that is if you have one person signed in and you have a group of people sitting with you, those individuals will need to complete the sign-in sheet, and I'm going to put that in the chat here in just a second. So look at your chat for that link, and the return information is on that sign-in sheet. So go ahead and return it to that information there. And then in addition to that, there is an evaluation. So if you would please take some time at the end of today to click the link. And again, I'm going to put that in the chat. And give us some feedback on today's presentation. We would certainly appreciate that. Brenda, do you have any closing comments before I close up for the day?
Great, thanks, Chris. Nice job, G. Thanks again for all that great information. lots of great questions and discussion. Yeah. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is part of our Commercial Vehicle Safety Center, and so you will be able to view the slides and the recording from this webinar from that site, and we do have slides and recordings from past webinars on there as well, and I did just post the link for the site in the chat box as well. In addition, on that site, there's information regarding resources that we have available, as well as information regarding our upcoming Commercial Vehicle Safety Summit next year, and so we're looking for more information on that. As Chris mentioned, please take time to complete that evaluation survey and give us any feedback or suggestions. And just thanks again for everyone for attending. I know we went a little bit long, and I thought it was a good discussion, good information. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris, to close
There
out.
is one more question. I'll go ahead and ask this question since it came in. So they're taking the time to do it, so let's go ahead and address it. If a new hire is extended an offer for employment that has a CLP and registered in CH when testing, is it considered pre-employment or random? You see that question, so maybe...
I do. Are they asking about testing, or are they asking about the query?
Shannon, if you want to unmute and ask the question, you're more than welcome to.
So what we are talking about, I'm at Clark County School District in Las Vegas, Nevada. So what we're talking about, we have already registered them. They have a permit, but when we put them in the query or we look at it, we're trying to find out, are we let's say they test positive, is that considered pre-employment? Or is it random? Because now this person has tested positive. How are they put in the system for we fired them? Now if they go someplace else, what are we going to do?
Okay, so the MRO, if it's a positive test, is going to report that violation, so there's nothing for you to report. If you were to send them to a pre-employment drug test and they refuse that drug test, it's going to depend on whether they took possession of that specimen cup or not, so because that's specifically a pre-employment requirement. So if the driver never took a possession of that specimen cup and it's a pre-employment test, then it's not a refusal. If they did take the possession of the specimen cup and then they didn't provide sufficient specimen or whatever reason that they refused, then that would be a refusal. And then you as the employer would that ordered that test would have to report it, but it would be as a pre-employment. It wouldn't be a random, because if they're not actually employed by you, then they're probably not in your testing pool.
They are in our testing pool, because as soon as they get swapped over to us in training, then they're considered in our testing pool. So that's where the confusion is on when are they going to be listed on to Clearinghouse.
Okay,
when
so
did we put in that violation?
Sorry, can I ask a clarifying question? Because I think I missed a portion of your opening part of your question. Are you saying you're a CDL school, or are you saying that you are a school, like an elementary school?
We are a school for like school bus drivers.
So you're a training provider then?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation about student drivers and the fact that the Watson case in December 2019 had established that CDL schools are not considered the employer of a student. So they shouldn't be put into the random testing pool of your regular employees like your instructors. They would need to register as a student driver. They're in essence their own employer, and they would need to go ahead and designate a TPA and join a consortium in which they would be in that pool.
Barry, you raised your hand. Barry, do you want to unmute and ask a question, or did you want to
Certainly,
verify?
I just had a question. I think it was answered, but I was to the understanding that a CLP does not cover you as a covered driver within the DOT Fmcsa drug and alcohol pool. And once you acquire a CDL, then you become a covered driver within your drug and alcohol pool. Is that correct?
If you have a CLP, you're still subject to drug and alcohol testing. Brian, can you go ahead and maybe add to or respond?
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add other than what you already said there. And it's basically the drug and alcohol testing rules themselves, as well as the clearinghouse rules, are equally applicable whether you have a learner's permit or a CDL. I mean, if you go into the book, so to speak, and read the applicability, it's the same for a CDL holder as it is a commercial learner's permit holder.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Well, with that being said, we will go ahead and wrap up today's session. Thank you guys for hanging out and asking these questions at the end. I know we went over, so thank you for that. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed and gained some new knowledge. I think we've come a long way since the first time we did this introduction to this presentation, close to 2 years ago, is it? Or maybe a year, Brenda? I can't remember now. So I would encourage you to visit our website at ugpti.org. You'll get more information on TLN as well as the Commercial Vehicle Safety Center. So with that, thank you, G, for sharing. Thank you, Brian, for chiming in. I certainly appreciate it. And Brenda, thank you so much for partnering with us to help deliver this valuable information. Obviously, a very hot topic in the industry. So thank you so much for that. With that, thank you again, everybody, for your time and attention. Get out there. Don't forget to be awesome. Have a great day.